Welcome back to my amazing channel, where we tell amazing African stories that promise to entertain, inform, and educate all of you, my teeming audience and subscribers worldwide. Please remember to subscribe to my channel and write your comments at the end of the video to inform me of any lesson. Also, for any addition and subtraction you will want me to introduce to this channel to enhance your viewing and listening pleasures. With that said, let's dive in straight into today's story. The night was unusually quiet in the Okuta mansion. The air was thick with the scent of aged wine and polished mahogany, and even the chandelier lights seemed to dim under the weight of the silence. Zinna had been warned about the billionaire's private room. No one went in there. Not the gardeners. Not the chefs. Not even Madame Yvonne, the chief maid with 30 years of service. But when the senior butler tripped and shattered a glass of rare Merlot on the Persian rug, Madame Yvonne screamed, "Zinna, go clean it before sunrise or you're out." Zinna, barely 4 weeks into her job, held her breath and stepped in. Everything inside the room whispered wealth. Golden handles, velvet curtains. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner. But there was something else in the air, something cold and lonely. As she bent to clean, she inhaled deeply, and suddenly the tears came. She didn't plan to cry. Not in this house. Not with her job on the line. But the tears rolled down her cheeks like they had been waiting forever. She thought of her mother's final breath, of the fire that took her brother, of the nights she slept behind the church, of the strangers who threw her leftover bread as if she were a stray. She knelt in a corner and wept silently, shoulders shaking but mouth shut. Zinna was a master of silent suffering. She had learned long ago that crying loud never brought help. It only brought mockery. What she didn't know was that behind the sheer curtain at the far end of the room, a man stood still. Xavier Okuta had returned early from his business trip, too tired to announce his arrival. He walked in to find a girl weeping in his sanctuary. His first instinct was to shout, but something stopped him. He watched her. Her fingers trembled on the mop handle. Her back rose and fell as she fought for composure. She wasn't crying for pity. She was breaking in silence. And for the first time in a long, long time, Xavier's cold heart stirred. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why her tears made the room feel warmer. But he couldn't look away. When she finished, she wiped her face, gathered her tools, and bowed at the door before exiting. Xavier remained in the shadows, heart pounding strangely, whispering into the silence. "Who are you, and why do I feel like I've seen your pain before?" Please subscribe. The sun rose gently over the mansion, casting golden light across the marbled floors. It was a new day, but for the staff of Okuta Mansion, the tension was familiar. Whispers floated through the halls. Everyone expected Zinna to be dismissed. The night before, she had crossed the invisible line. She entered his room. She lingered. She broke the rule. In the servants' quarters, Zinna prepared herself for the worst. She tied her headscarf tightly and buttoned her uniform slowly. Her fingers moved steadily, but her heart knocked hard inside her chest. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not after all she'd survived. This job gave her dignity, a roof, food, hope. At precisely 8:30 a.m., Xavier came downstairs. He was dressed in his usual tailored suit, sharp and silent. The room fell quiet as he walked past the butlers and maids. Then he stopped. He turned his eyes to her. Her, the girl with the red eyes from last night. "What's your name?" he asked, voice calm but heavy. Zinna blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed, then open again. "Zinna. Zinna, sir." He nodded once. Slowly. "Don't cry in my room again." Heads turned. Eyes widened. That was it. "Yes, sir," she whispered. He walked away. But Zinna stood frozen. The sound of her name in his mouth echoed in her head. Not even Madame Yvonne had ever said her name like that, with curiosity instead of command. What she didn't know was that Xavier had whispered her name 5 times already that morning. Zinna, Zinna, Zinna. He didn't understand why he needed to hear it again, or why her face had followed him into his dreams. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he wanted to remember someone's name. And he did. The morning breeze floated in gently through the half-open windows of a library, where Zinna dusted the shelves with delicate care. She had grown to love the quiet of this room. No yelling, no footsteps, just the rustle of pages and the scent of old books. It reminded her of the corner in her village where her mother used to read borrowed magazines out loud by kerosene lamp. She stood on her toes, stretching to reach the top shelf, sleeves rolled up. As her arm extended, the cuff slipped lower, revealing the long, twisted scar on her wrist. "Did someone do that to you?" A deep voice said. Zinna startled. Her cloth dropped. Xavier stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets, gaze locked on her arm. She quickly pulled her sleeve down. "It's nothing, sir." He stepped closer. "That didn't look like nothing." Zinna lowered her eyes. Her fingers clutched her rag too tightly. "It was a fire. A long time ago." He didn't speak. "I lost my brother that day," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier's chest tightened. There it was again, that invisible thread pulling him toward her. He turned away abruptly, nodding. "Get back to work." She obeyed, but as he walked down the hallway, something inside him wouldn't rest. He remembered that fire. It was in the news years ago, a slum that burned because of faulty electric lines. Emergency help came too late. Rumor had it that his father's company ignored the cries for help. His father, the man who taught him to be powerful and untouched. That night, Xavier sat in his study with a bottle of scotch. Her words replayed. "I lost my brother." He closed his eyes. "She doesn't know I was the reason help never came." And suddenly, the billionaire who feared nothing was afraid of a maid with a scar and a story. It was a rainy afternoon. Most of the mansion was quiet except for the gentle drumming of rain against the windows. Zinna had finished cleaning the dining room and now moved to the west hallway, the one no one used. As she mopped the floor slowly, she began to hum. Then hum turned into words. The song was old, one her mother used to sing. The lyrics spoke of patience, sorrow, and the kind of love that waited, even when no one came. She didn't know anyone was listening. Xavier stood at the top of the staircase, frozen. He had come to grab his forgotten tablet. Instead, he heard a voice, a soft, broken melody that held him prisoner. Her voice wasn't trained, but it had depth. Pain. Hope. Every note clutched at him. She sang. "I wait where no one sees me. I dream where no one sleeps. I love without being known, and still my heart weeps." He didn't breathe. She stopped mid-verse, sensing something, and looked around. No one. She continued her mopping, and whispered the chorus again. Xavier leaned against the wall, eyes shut. He had paid millions for musicians to perform at his galas. But none had pierced him like this girl's lonely hymn. And he hated it. Hated that he felt so seen by someone who didn't even know he was there. The chief planner paused. "Sir? She's not trained." "She'll manage." The line went dead. News spread like wildfire. Madame Yvonne stormed into the kitchen. "Who does she think she is?" Zinna, shocked, tried to protest. I've never served before." "You will tonight," Madame Yvonne hissed. "But if you embarrass this house, you'll never work anywhere again." The evening came. Zinna wore a black serving dress too big for her, borrowed from emergency wardrobe. Her hair was tied neatly. Her hands shook. Guests arrived. Flashy cars, glittering gowns, gold cufflinks. Xavier stood like a prince among kings. But his eyes scanned only one face. Zinna entered, carrying a tray of wine flutes. Her steps were unsure, but her eyes were calm. Gasps echoed softly. A few guests whispered, "Who's that?" "That's not the usual girl." Linda, Xavier's longtime companion and rumored fiancée, narrowed her eyes. And just like that, war was declared. Because Zinna didn't know it yet, but someone already hated her enough to destroy her. Someone who refused to lose the billionaire to a maid. The mansion was quieter now, the grand halls devoid of their usual clamor. Zinna moved through the corridors as though invisible, a ghost among the treasures of wealth. She had become accustomed to the grand silences, to the hushed whispers of the mansion, but today felt different. The air itself seemed thick with anticipation, each step echoing louder than the last. It had been weeks since Xavier had summoned her to his office, and since then, the atmosphere between them had shifted. He still watched her, still observed her from across the room, but his gaze was no longer just curious. It was searching, haunting, almost. Every glance felt like an unspoken question, one that left Zinna breathless and unsure of what to do next. Please subscribe. Zinna entered the kitchen, her heart in a knot. The staff was already busy preparing for the evening's dinner party. Linda was there too, her eyes fixed on Zinna with a venomous look that never quite left. The tension was palpable, as if the entire staff had been waiting for a moment to pounce. "Still standing in the shadows, I see," Linda sneered, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You may have caught his eye for a moment, but you'll never truly be seen." Zinna clenched her fists, resisting the urge to respond. She had learned to ignore Linda's cruel words, but today they stung more than usual. Was it possible she was right? Could she ever truly belong in this world, where everything was so far out of reach? But then, just as the weight of doubt threatened to pull her under, a sound broke through the tension, a soft knock on the kitchen door. "Zinna." It was Xavier's voice, rich and commanding as always. Her breath caught in her throat. The staff scattered as if they'd heard a divine command. Zinna stood frozen, unsure of what was happening or why she was summoned. She turned slowly, every step feeling like it was leading her into unknown territory. Xavier stood at the door, tall and unyielding, his dark eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity that stole her breath away. "I need you to join me for dinner," he said, his tone so calm it seemed almost foreign in this house full of secrets. Zinna's heart leaped into her throat. She nodded, trying to steady herself. "Of course, sir." There was something in the way he said it, something that suggested this wasn't a request at all. Dinner was a private affair, a rarity in Xavier's world of extravagant gatherings. The table was set for two, an exquisite spread of delicacies, yet Zinna couldn't focus on the food. Her mind was consumed with questions she couldn't answer. Why was Xavier suddenly so interested in her? What did he want from her? Was this just another test, another game to play with her emotions? As she sat across from him, the silence between them was deafening. Xavier didn't speak, nor did he take his eyes off her. Zinna shifted uneasily in her seat, struggling to maintain composure. He was so close, yet it felt as though an insurmountable distance separated them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Xavier spoke. "Tell me, Zinna, how does it feel to be seen?" Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't sure if he was speaking about the physical act of being noticed or something deeper, something that touched the soul. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not used to it. I'm not sure if I ever will be." Xavier leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're more than what you think you are," he said quietly, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. For a moment, Zinna felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. She had never allowed herself to believe she was anything more than a maid. But now, in the presence of this man who saw her, really saw her, she began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, she could be more. The following days were filled with unspoken tension, a delicate balance between the roles they had always played and the shifting dynamics that neither of them could ignore. Zinna went about her work with her head lowered, her thoughts occupied by Xavier's words. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was drawing her in, pulling her closer with every interaction, every fleeting glance. But at the same time, she could feel the boundaries closing in. Linda's cruel whispers grew louder, the judgment from the other staff more apparent. Zinna knew the rules of this world. She was a maid, nothing more, and Xavier's attention was a fleeting moment, a luxury she could never afford. One afternoon, as she was dusting the grand windows, she caught sight of Xavier in the distance, standing by the garden, his back to her. He appeared lost in thought, but there was something different about him today. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. Zinna watched him for a long moment, her heart aching. She wanted to approach him, to ask him what he was thinking, to ask him why he had been so kind, why he had shown her a glimpse of something she could never have. But before she could move, Linda appeared beside her, her presence cold and unsettling. "Don't fool yourself," Linda's voice hissed, low and threatening. "He's playing you. Men like him don't settle for women like you." Zinna swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't need to respond. Linda already knew what she was thinking. The sharp sound of footsteps approaching broke the tension. Zinna turned to find Xavier walking toward her. He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze resting on her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "Zinna," he said, his voice low and commanding, "will you join me for a walk?" Her heart raced. There was no turning back now. "Yes, sir." The walk through the garden was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Zinna felt as though they were the only two people in the world. Xavier's presence beside her was overwhelming, his energy radiating in a way that made it hard to breathe. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to break the silence that had settled between them. But Xavier seemed content to simply walk, his eyes never leaving her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You've been quiet," he remarked softly, his voice almost gentle. "Is something wrong?" Zinna shook her head, unable to speak. She had never been good at voicing her feelings. How could she explain what was happening inside her? How could she put into words the emotions that had taken root in her heart? Xavier seemed to sense her hesitation. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his gaze searching. "Zinna," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "Tell me what you're thinking." Zinna's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know if she could say it, but she couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Afraid of what this is. Afraid of what you want from me." For a long moment, Xavier said nothing. Then, in the quiet of the garden, he reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm not asking for anything, Zinna," he said softly. "I only want you to be yourself, whatever that means." The evening of that day still hung in the air as Zinna returned to her room, her thoughts in turmoil. Xavier's words echoed in her mind. Be yourself. But could she? Could she truly shed the layers of fear, doubt, and shame that had been built up over years of silence? She stood before her mirror, staring at the woman who looked back at her. A maid, yes, but something more now, something that had begun to shift and change in ways she couldn't fully understand. The knock on the door startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. "Zinna," Xavier's voice came from the other side. "May I speak with you?" Her heart skipped a beat. She opened the door, and there he was, standing in the dim hallway, his presence filling the space between them. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but searching. Zinna nodded, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him everything, to open up to him, but she didn't know how. There was so much more to this than either of them could say. "I'm okay," she whispered, though the truth was far more complicated than that. Xavier smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Good." And in that moment, Zinna realized that this was only the beginning of something dangerous, something real. The mansion seemed colder that morning, its vast halls echoing with silence. Zinna's heart beat heavier with each step, each day drawing her deeper into a world she didn't belong to. As the staff moved about, performing their duties with practiced ease, Zinna couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something profound, something terrifying. She couldn't stop thinking about the garden walk with Xavier. His words still lingered in her mind. Be yourself. It seemed so simple, yet so impossible. Who was she now? Who was she becoming? The door to the kitchen swung open, and Linda appeared with a scowl etched across her face. She'd been watching Zinna closely these past few days, a quiet storm brewing beneath her cold exterior. "You're walking dangerously close to the line, you know," Linda said, her voice low but filled with venom. "Don't think you're special because he's been paying you attention. You're just a maid, Zinna. Nothing more." Zinna didn't respond, though the sting of Linda's words hit deeper than usual. She had heard them before, but today they felt like a warning that was all too real. Later, when the tasks of the day were finally finished, Zinna found herself once again outside, alone in the quiet of the evening. The garden had become her refuge, a place where the weight of her thoughts could be carried away by the breeze. But tonight, as she wandered among the flowers, she couldn't shake the thought that Xavier's gaze had begun to feel like something more than curiosity. It was desire. The heat of it was undeniable, and it terrified her. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Zinna." She turned, startled to find Xavier standing just a few feet away, his gaze intense as ever. "Xavier," she whispered, unsure of how to address him anymore. Her feelings were a tangled mess of uncertainty and longing. "I've been looking for you," he said quietly, stepping closer. "I need to talk to you." Her breath hitched in her throat. "About what?" He paused for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "About us," he finally said. "I need to know what this is." Zinna's pulse quickened, the question hanging in the air like an invisible force. What was this? What were they? Was it just an illusion, a fleeting moment that would pass? Or was there something real here, something that neither of them could deny? I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling. You've given me so much to think about." Xavier took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's what I want, Zinna. I want you to think about us. I want you to let me in." The days that followed were filled with internal battles that Zinna fought quietly within herself. The pressure to keep up the facade of the maid, who was invisible to all but Xavier, weighed heavily on her. She had been given a glimpse into a world of power, beauty, and wealth, a world where she had never thought she could belong. And yet, in Xavier's presence, she found herself longing for something she had never even known she wanted. But the deeper she got, the more dangerous it became. She was crossing lines she had once thought sacred, and with each passing day, she felt the pull of Xavier's presence even more. He was everywhere. His gaze, his words, the quiet moments they shared when no one was looking. But Linda's cruel whispers haunted her. "You don't belong here," she had said. "You'll never be anything more than a maid." Zinna tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, like a poison seeping into her thoughts. It was hard to ignore the reality of her place in the world. She was nothing more than a servant in this mansion, a piece of furniture for Xavier to observe, nothing more. And yet, the way he looked at her, the way he had touched her hand, it felt like more. She couldn't deny the connection she felt, the undeniable pull that he had over her heart. Was it love? Or was it something darker, something more dangerous? That night, as Zinna worked late in the kitchen, preparing for yet another lavish dinner, she found herself alone in the silence. The only sound was the soft clink of silverware as she set the table. Her thoughts raced, and the room felt smaller with each passing second. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. "Zinna." Her breath caught as she spun around to find Xavier standing there, his presence as commanding as ever. His eyes searched hers, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Zinna nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Of course." They walked through the mansion together, silence stretching between them until they reached the garden. The moonlight illuminated their path, casting a soft glow over the flowers and trees. Xavier stopped beneath a tree, his eyes locked on hers. "Zinna," he began, his voice laced with something new, something vulnerable. "I want you to know that what I feel for you, it's not just a passing fancy. I've never been able to stop thinking about you." Zinna's breath hitched in her chest. Her heart pounded in her ears as she searched his eyes for any hint of doubt. But there was none. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. "But I feel it too. I just don't know how to navigate this." Xavier stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "You don't have to know, Zinna. All you have to do is trust me." As the days passed, the tension between Zinna and Xavier grew more palpable. She found herself torn between two worlds, the world she had always known, and the one that Xavier had opened up to her. Her duties as a maid still required her attention, but her heart and mind were increasingly consumed by thoughts of him. The moments they shared were fleeting, stolen glances, and whispered words that seemed to carry the weight of everything unspoken between them. Zinna's heart fluttered every time their paths crossed, but with each passing day, the reality of their situation became clearer. Zinna was not his equal. She was not even close. The gulf between them was impossible to ignore, and yet the connection they shared was undeniable. One evening, as she prepared to leave the kitchen after another long day, Zinna saw Xavier standing by the doorway, waiting for her. His eyes were filled with something more than desire, something that bordered on desperation. "I need to know if you feel the same way I do," Xavier said, his voice raw, vulnerable. Zinna's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "I can't stop thinking about you, Zinna. Every moment we're apart, I feel like I'm losing something. I can't pretend this is nothing anymore." Tears stung Zinna's eyes as she met his gaze. "But what about the world we live in? What about who I am? I'm nothing but a maid, Xavier." He cupped her face gently in his hands, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "You're more than that, Zinna. Don't you see it?" She shook her head, overwhelmed with the emotions swirling inside her. "I don't know how to be anything more than I am. I don't know if I can change." Xavier's voice softened. "You don't have to change, Zinna. You're already perfect just the way you are." Later that night, as the mansion settled into its usual quiet, Zinna found herself alone in her room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had been offered a glimpse of something she never thought she would have: love, affection, and a future that seemed both impossible and beautiful. But she was scared. Scared of the consequences, scared of what might happen if she let herself fall for Xavier. The power he had over her heart was undeniable, but she was still a maid. She still belonged to a world where people like Xavier didn't look twice at women like her. Her hand rested on her chest as she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had just confessed to him. The words had been true, but the fear that followed them was just as real. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Zinna." It was Xavier's voice again, low and filled with urgency. She opened the door to find him standing there, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "I need you to trust me," he said, his hand reaching out for hers. "Don't let fear keep us apart. We can be whatever we want to be, Zinna." For a moment, she stood there, unsure of what to do, but in her heart, she knew there was only one thing she could say. "Yes, Xavier." And just like that, she stepped forward, crossing the line she had never dared to cross before. Zinna woke up in a haze of confusion, her mind racing with thoughts of Xavier. The quiet sanctuary of the night before had been a fleeting reprieve from the chaos that now swirled around them. She had let herself be vulnerable, let herself trust him with a part of her heart that she had long ago locked away. But even as she surrendered to the feelings she had tried so hard to bury, a creeping doubt lingered in the back of her mind. What would happen when the truth finally came out? When the world, the staff, and everyone else found out that she, the maid, had become the center of Xavier's world? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. The walls she had carefully built around her were crumbling, and the storm of consequences she feared loomed closer with every passing day. She spent the morning cleaning the massive windows in the grand dining room, her mind preoccupied with the whirlwind of emotions she had been suppressing. It was a routine task, something familiar and mundane, yet it seemed to symbolize the weight of the world on her shoulders. The soft sunlight streaming through the glass was a cruel reminder of the beautiful life she longed for, a life that seemed too distant, too impossible for someone like her. But even as the uncertainty gnawed at her, she couldn't deny the pull she still felt toward Xavier. Every time their eyes met, it was as if nothing else in the world mattered. Every touch, every whispered word felt like a promise that, despite everything, they would find a way to make it work. But would they? The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Zinna turned to find Linda standing in the doorway, her face a mask of disdain. "You're spending too much time with him," Linda said, her voice dripping with venom. "I don't know what he sees in you, but you're playing a dangerous game. The moment he tires of you, where will you be?" Zinna's stomach churned, the words landing like slap. Linda's jealousy was no secret, but today it felt sharper, more personal. There was a bitterness in her gaze that Zinna couldn't ignore. "I don't know what you're talking about," Zinna replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just doing my job." Linda's laughter was hollow, mocking. "That's what you think, isn't it? That you're just doing your job. But the truth is, you're nothing more than a toy to him. Don't fool yourself into thinking this is real." The words stung, but Zinna refused to let them show. She stood tall, though her heart raced in her chest. "I don't need to explain myself to you." Linda's eyes narrowed. "You will one day, when you're left with nothing." Zinna remained silent, the weight of Linda's words hanging heavy in the air. As much as she wanted to deny them, part of her feared that they might be true. What if Xavier truly was just playing with her? What if, in the end, she was nothing more than a passing fancy? Her heart clenched at the thought, but she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't pull away from him, no matter how much the world tried to tear them apart. The following days felt like a test of endurance. Xavier had been distant, his presence more reserved than usual. Zinna had noticed the subtle changes, his gaze lingering less, his words more measured. And though she tried to ignore it, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if Linda's words had struck a chord. Was he pulling away? Had the weight of their differences finally become too much for him? Please subscribe. Zinna spent long hours working in silence, trying to push the fear and doubt to the back of her mind. But each time Xavier entered the room, her heart would leap in her chest, only to fall when his gaze didn't meet hers in the same way it once had. It was as if a barrier had formed between them, invisible but undeniable. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Zinna found herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the family. The grand dining room would soon be filled with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of silverware, but Zinna couldn't shake the hollow feeling that lingered in her chest. The sound of footsteps once again filled the hallway, but this time, when she turned, it was not Linda. It was Xavier. "Zinna," his voice was softer now, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment, for the words that would either shatter everything or bring them closer. They stepped outside, the cool night air hitting Zinna's skin like a breath of fresh air. The moonlight illuminated their faces, casting a soft glow that seemed to highlight the uncertainty in Xavier's eyes. "I've been thinking," Xavier began, his voice laced with regret. "About everything. About us." Zinna felt a lump form in her throat, the fear creeping back in. What do you mean? I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of guilt. But I think I've been moving too fast. I don't want you to feel like you have to be with me out of obligation. Zinna's heart sank, the words cutting deeper than she expected. Is that what you think? That I'm only here because I have to be? No, Xavier said quickly, his voice firm. No, that's not what I meant. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to pressure you into something you're not ready for. Zinna took a step back, her mind racing. I don't know what I'm ready for, Xavier. I don't know what's real anymore. Xavier looked down at the ground, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I never wanted to make you feel this way. I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I don't know how to navigate it. I don't want to lose you. Zinna swallowed hard, her emotions swirling inside her like a storm. I don't want to lose you either, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They stood there, the distance between them palpable, the tension in the air thick, with unsaid words. And for a moment, neither of them knew how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. That night, as Zinna lay in bed, her thoughts were consumed by Xavier's words. What did it mean? Was he pulling away, or was he just as lost as she was? Every part of her wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but the fear of rejection held her back. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable with anyone before, and now that she had given Xavier a piece of her heart, the thought of losing him terrified her. But what if he truly didn't feel the same way? What if everything they had shared was just a fleeting moment, a dream that had already faded? The sound of the door creaking open broke her train of thought. She turned to see Xavier standing there, his silhouette framed by the dim light from a hallway. Zinna, he said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what we said earlier. Zinna sat up in bed, her heart racing. What do you mean? He took a step closer, his eyes meeting hers with a depth of emotion that took her breath away. I can't stop thinking about you. About us. And I can't pretend anymore that I don't want this. I don't care about the differences between us. I want you, Zinna. More than anything. Zinna's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment where everything would change. I want you too, she whispered, her voice trembling. Xavier stepped forward, his hands reaching for her as he pulled her into an embrace. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zinna felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be safe, loved, and unconditionally wanted. But even as they held each other, the shadow of the world outside still loomed large, threatening to tear them apart. The days following Xavier's confession were a whirlwind of emotions for Zinna. His words echoed in her mind, over and over again, as if they were a lifeline she couldn't escape. I want you, Zinna, more than anything. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the warmth of his embrace, the reassurance of his presence. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that what they had was real. But the world outside their bubble was a different story. Zinna couldn't escape the reality of who she was. She was the maid, the one who served silently in the background. A person who had spent her entire life making herself invisible, living in the shadows of the people she worked for. The thought of the others in the house discovering what was happening between her and Xavier terrified her. In the kitchen, as she chopped vegetables for the evening meal, the weight of her thoughts seemed unbearable. The knife in her hand shook slightly, as if it too felt the tension in the air. She couldn't keep living in fear, could she? She couldn't hide their love forever. It was becoming too real, too powerful to ignore. The sound of footsteps drew her out of her thoughts. She turned to find Linda standing in the doorway, her eyes narrowed, and her lips set in a tight line. You're getting too comfortable, Zinna, Linda said, her voice a mixture of contempt and warning. You think no one can see what's going on between you and Xavier? Zinna's heart skipped a beat. She had known this confrontation was coming, but she hadn't expected it to be like this. So blunt, so sharp. She set the knife down carefully, her palms sweating. I don't know what you're talking about, Zinna replied, her voice quiet but firm, though she could feel the tremor in her words. Linda crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Oh, don't pretend like you're innocent in all this. I see how he looks at you. You think you're special? You're just another distraction. He's bored, Zinna. He'll move on to the next pretty thing when he's had enough. Zinna's breath caught in her throat. Linda's words were like daggers, sharp and pointed. You're wrong, Zinna managed to say, her voice trembling. You don't know him. You don't know what we have. Linda's lips twisted into a bitter smile. I know exactly what he's like. You think you're different? That he'll change for you? You're just another name in his long list of fleeting interests. You won't last, Zinna. Zinna's heart ached with the weight of Linda's words. The fear she had buried deep inside her now rose to the surface, and she had to fight to keep herself from breaking down in front of her. But she refused to give Linda the satisfaction. I'll prove you wrong, Zinna said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. The following day, Zinna could barely focus on her work. Linda's words haunted her, lingering in the back of her mind. The image of Xavier, his face filled with sincerity as he confessed his feelings for her, was at odds with the doubts that clouded her thoughts. She had to ask herself, was this really love, or was it just a fleeting moment that would eventually fade away like everything else in her life? She couldn't pretend she wasn't scared. Scared that Xavier would tire of her. Scared that his affection was just a temporary escape from his world of wealth and privilege, something to occupy his time until the next distraction came along. That evening, after everyone had gathered for dinner, Zinna found herself alone in the kitchen again. She was clearing away the dishes when she felt the familiar presence of Xavier behind her. Zinna, he said softly, his voice warm and reassuring. Can we talk? She turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked at her, his eyes full of concern, and for a moment, everything else in the world faded away. It was just the two of them. I don't want you to worry, Xavier said, his voice quiet. But I can sense that something's been bothering you. Zinna swallowed hard, trying to push the lump in her throat aside. She couldn't hide it any longer. She had to face the fear that had been eating away at her. She had to confront it, even if it meant exposing her insecurities. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared of what this means. What we have. I've never been a part of your world, Xavier. I don't belong here. Xavier's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his hand gently reaching for hers. Zinna, you don't have to be anything you're not. You're not a maid to me. You're so much more. I've never felt this way about anyone. Not like this. You are exactly who I want. Zinna's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, she really did. But the fear that had been instilled in her for so long was hard to shake. It had become a part of her, something she couldn't just erase. I don't know if I can trust this, she whispered. I don't know if I can trust myself. I'm scared that when you find out the truth, that I'm just a maid, just someone who serves in the background, you'll leave me. Xavier's hand tightened around hers, and he leaned forward, his forehead gently pressing against hers. Zinna, I'm not going anywhere. I don't care who you are or what your title is. What matters is how you make me feel. And you make me feel alive, like I've never felt before. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for a moment, Zinna allowed herself to believe him. Maybe this wasn't a fleeting moment. Maybe this was real. But the fear still lingered, threatening to undo everything they had built. She wanted to trust him, wanted to surrender to the love he was offering, but her past, her history, was a heavy burden. It was hard to let go of the belief that she wasn't worthy of the kind of love Xavier was offering her. Why me, Xavier? She asked quietly. Why would you choose me? Xavier gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes never leaving hers. Because you are everything I never knew I needed. You make me better, Zinna. You make me want to be a better man. And I don't need anything else. I just need you. Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let go of the fear and surrender to the love that was blossoming between them. But a part of her still couldn't shake the doubt. What if he was wrong? What if he eventually grew tired of her? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before, a promise. A promise that, despite the world's expectations, despite the barriers between them, he would choose her every time. The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of peace. Xavier was patient with her, always there when she needed him, but never pushing her to move faster than she was ready. They spent their days together, talking, laughing, and sharing moments of vulnerability. For the first time in a long while, Zinna allowed herself to let go of the fears that had held her captive for so long. But the tension between them was still palpable. Zinna knew that their connection couldn't remain a secret forever. The world would eventually find out, and when that happened, everything they had would be put to the test. One evening, after dinner, as the household settled into its usual routine, Zinna found herself alone in the garden. The night was warm, and the stars above sparkled like diamonds in the sky. She leaned against a stone wall, taking a deep breath as she tried to clear her mind. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Zinna. She turned to see Xavier standing in the shadows, his gaze soft but filled with determination. Are you ready? He asked, his voice steady. Zinna's heart skipped a beat. Ready for what? Stop hiding, Xavier said, stepping closer. I don't want to keep this a secret anymore. I don't care what the world thinks. Zinna's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment they had both been avoiding. The moment when they would have to face the consequences of their love. Are you sure? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Xavier said, his voice unwavering. And in that moment, Zinna knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The moment Zinna had been avoiding had arrived. The secret that had tethered them together, cloaking their love in the shadows, was no longer something they could hide from. Xavier's decision to reveal their relationship to the world was bold and unflinching, but for Zinna, it felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. The fear that had haunted her, that her past would resurface and shatter everything they had built, gripped her tightly. That evening, as they sat together in the grand living room, surrounded by the hustle of the household, Xavier turned to her, his eyes brimming with sincerity. We need to talk to them, he said, his voice calm, yet filled with the certainty of his words. Zinna swallowed hard, her palms slick with sweat. Are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want? Xavier's gaze softened as he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers with a tenderness that sent a ripple of warmth through her. I'm sure. It's the only way we can move forward. Xavier's gaze softened as he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers with a tenderness that sent a ripple of warmth through her. I'm sure. It's the only way we can move forward. Zinna's mind raced. What would happen when the truth came out? Would they be met with acceptance or rejection? Would her life, her carefully guarded existence, come crumbling down? The prospect of revealing everything terrified her, but as she looked into Xavier's eyes, she saw something that steadied her heart. Love, unwavering and true. But even then, the reality of the situation felt so raw. The fact that she was still a maid, still the woman who had spent her life serving others, weighed heavily on her. The thought of facing the scorn and judgment of the world made her stomach churn. But Xavier's grip on her hand was firm, grounding her. He wasn't pulling away, and that was all that mattered. Later that night, when the house had quieted down and the family gathered for their usual after-dinner discussions, Zinna found herself standing at the doorway to the sitting room. Xavier was already there, waiting for her, his presence a comforting reassurance. She stood for a moment, her nerves almost overwhelming, before Xavier turned toward her, his eyes locking onto hers. It's time. They walked in together, and the room fell silent as everyone looked up. The tension was palpable, thick with unspoken words. Linda was the first to speak, her gaze suspicious as she studied the two of them. Is something going on here? She asked, her voice laced with sarcasm, though it was clear she was trying to mask her curiosity. Zinna's heart raced. She could feel the eyes of the entire household on her. Every eye, every set of judgmental stares, felt like an immense weight. But Xavier's hand, still holding hers, was the only anchor she had left. Yes, Xavier said, his voice strong and clear. Zinna and I are together. The room fell into a stunned silence. The shock was evident on every face, but it was Linda's reaction that caught Zinna off guard. The harshness in Linda's eyes had softened, but the underlying bitterness remained. I told you, Zinna, Linda muttered, more to herself than anyone else. I told you he'd tire of you. Zinna flinched at the words, her heart sinking. She could feel the tension in the air, the brewing storm of emotions, but Xavier stepped forward, his voice unwavering. No, Linda, you're wrong. This isn't a passing fancy. I'm not going anywhere. Zinna squeezed his hand, grateful for his strength, but her own voice caught in her throat. She wanted to defend herself, to shout at Linda that she wasn't some fleeting distraction, but the words wouldn't come. The fear of being rejected, of being less than enough, was too powerful. Xavier continued, his eyes scanning the room, meeting each gaze with an intensity that made Zinna's heart race. I'm choosing her. I've made my decision, and nothing you say will change that. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, but there was a shift in the air. Xavier's declaration hung between them, unspoken but understood. He was no longer willing to hide, to pretend. And neither was she. The days after the revelation were filled with a new kind of tension. It wasn't just the staff or the family that Zinna had to contend with. It was her own fears, her own insecurities that haunted her at every turn. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the whispers that followed her through the halls. Every corner seemed to hold judgment, every glance filled with suspicion. But the one thing that Zinna hadn't anticipated was the shift in Xavier. While the world around them reacted with varying degrees of shock and disapproval, Xavier remained steady. He never once pulled away, never once questioned his decision to be with her. His love for her, his unwavering devotion, was like a shield she could cling to. One afternoon, Zinna found herself alone in the garden again, lost in thought. The silence of the estate had become suffocating, the walls closing in as the weight of the truth settled in. She wondered if she could ever truly escape the constraints of her past. Would the world ever accept her as Xavier's equal? The sound of footsteps behind her broke her train of thought, and she turned to find Xavier standing there, his eyes filled with concern. "Please subscribe. You've been quiet," he said, his voice gentle. "What's going on in that mind of yours?" Zinna looked up at him, her chest tightening. "I don't know if I can do this, Xavier. I don't know if I can handle the judgment. Every time I walk into a room, I feel like everyone is staring at me, waiting for me to fail." Xavier stepped closer, his hands gently cupping her face, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to carry this burden alone," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm right here with you, and I'll never let you fall." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him, the fear she had been carrying for so long beginning to melt away. "But what if I'm not enough?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Xavier's gaze softened, and he pulled her into his arms. "You're more than enough, Zinna. You always have been." For the first time, Zinna allowed herself to believe him. She let go of the fear that had held her captive for so long and allowed herself to be swept away in the certainty of Xavier's love. No longer did she have to hide. No longer did she have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. The staff, while still cautious and unsure, began to accept the reality of Zinna and Xavier's relationship. But it was not just the family that had to adjust, it was Zinna herself. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, Linda approached her again, this time with a different look in her eyes. There was no malice in her gaze, just a quiet understanding. "You know," Linda began, her voice surprisingly calm, "I don't know what you see in him. But if you make him happy, I suppose that's all that matters." Zinna met her gaze, surprised by the shift in Linda's demeanor. "Thank you," she said softly. "I never wanted this to cause any trouble." Linda shrugged, her expression unreadable. "It's not your fault. The world isn't always kind to people like you. But if he's chosen you, then you're strong enough to handle it." Zinna felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time, Linda had spoken to her not as a rival, but as someone who understood the challenges of their world. It wasn't acceptance, but it was something closer to respect. As Zinna continued her journey with Xavier, she realized that love, while beautiful and pure, was also difficult and uncertain. But with Xavier by her side, she was beginning to believe that they could face whatever came their way, together. The days following their decision to come out as a couple had been a mix of relief and tension. The household had settled into a new rhythm, and while Zinna felt a sense of freedom that she had never known before, there was still an undercurrent of judgment she couldn't shake. Every time she crossed paths with the staff, there was a subtle change in their demeanor, eyes averted, hushed whispers as she passed by. But what hurt the most was the quiet rejection she sometimes sensed from the other members of the family. But Xavier remained constant. His love for her was steadfast, and his unwavering support gave her strength. Despite the silent disapproval, he made sure to show her every day how much she meant to him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, Zinna allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of it. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Xavier's eyes lingered on Zinna for a moment longer than usual. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking." Zinna raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What about?" "I've been thinking about the future," he continued, his gaze intense. "I want to build a life with you, Zinna. Not just here, but beyond this house, beyond the expectations. I want us to have a future where we're not bound by the world's judgment." Zinna's heart skipped a beat. His words were what she had always longed to hear, but they also stirred a deep sense of fear. What would it take to create that kind of life? Would it be enough to just love each other? Or would the world constantly try to tear them apart? "I don't know how that would look," she said quietly, her voice filled with doubt. "Everything is so different now. The moment we stepped out, I felt like we stepped into something much bigger than I could ever imagine. Xavier smiled gently, taking her hand in his. We'll figure it out together. One step at a time. As long as we're together, we can handle whatever comes our way. Zinna wanted to believe him. She truly did. But there were so many obstacles, so many things standing in their way. Would their love be strong enough to overcome them? As Zinna and Xavier spent more time together, they began to encounter the harsh realities of their situation. Whispers and rumors started to spread throughout the community. At first, it was just idle chatter, but soon, it grew into something more dangerous. Family, friends, colleagues, even people who had been polite and friendly before now looked at Zinna with disdain. One afternoon, Zinna walked into the living room to find Xavier deep in conversation with his father, Victor. Victor's voice was low and intense, his words sharp. Xavier, I understand that you've made your choice, Victor was saying, his tone thick with disappointment. But you're letting this relationship cloud your judgment. She's a maid, Xavier. A servant. You're tying yourself to someone who can never be a part of your world. Zinna felt her stomach drop. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the words hit her like a slap. She tried to retreat quietly, but Xavier's voice stopped her. Father, he said, his voice unwavering, I don't care about status, wealth, or titles. What I care about is her. Zinna has something none of you understand. She has a heart, integrity, and strength. I don't need to explain myself to you. Zinna's heart swelled with a mix of pride and uncertainty. She couldn't believe that Xavier was standing up to his father for her, but a small voice inside her whispered doubts. She knew that Xavier's father, and likely the rest of his family, would never truly accept her. It would never be easy. But Xavier's next words, spoken with a certainty that took her breath away, cut through her fear. Zinna is the woman I love, Xavier continued, his gaze intense. I won't apologize for that. And I won't let anyone, especially you, make me feel ashamed of it. Zinna stepped into the room, her eyes meeting Xavier's. She could see the weight of his words in his eyes, the defiance, and the vulnerability. He was choosing her. And in that moment, Zinna realized that the battle they were facing wasn't just about their love. It was about claiming their place in a world that didn't want to accept them. As the days passed, Zinna found herself increasingly torn between the love she shared with Xavier and the harsh realities of her life. She knew Xavier was fighting for them, but she couldn't help but feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into an abyss of uncertainty. Every day was a struggle, not just against the judgment of others, but against the fear that Xavier's love wouldn't be enough. Would the world eventually break them? Would the weight of expectations crush them both? Or could they rise above it all? It was one afternoon, after yet another tense conversation with Xavier's family, that Zinna found herself walking through the garden, seeking solace in the familiar calm of the flowers and the quiet. But as she wandered, her thoughts were interrupted by a figure approaching from a distance, Linda. The revelation, her bitterness a constant reminder of the world Zinna didn't belong to. But today, there was something different in her eyes. Zinna, Linda called softly, stopping a few feet away. Can we talk? Zinna nodded, though her nerves were on edge. She wasn't sure what to expect. Linda had never been kind to her, and Zinna didn't know how to navigate the space between them now. I've been thinking a lot, Linda said, her voice uncharacteristically calm. I've seen how much Xavier cares about you. And I can't help but admire that. You've been through a lot, and you're still standing. Zinna was taken aback. I don't understand. Linda shifted uncomfortably. I don't think anyone could ever understand the pressure Xavier faces, she continued. His family expects perfection. But I see what he sees in you, Zinna. You're strong. You're more than just a maid. You've got a heart, and that's something no one else has. Zinna felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected Linda to say anything like this. She wasn't sure if she should believe it, or if Linda was just offering empty words. I don't want to hurt him, Zinna whispered, the weight of the past few weeks crashing down on her. But I'm scared. Scared that this won't be enough. That we won't be enough. Linda took a deep breath, her expression softening. I can't promise that it will be easy, Zinna. But I can promise that if you keep fighting, you'll both find your way. Just remember, love isn't something you run from. It's something you stand for, even when the world tries to tear it apart. Zinna's heart fluttered at Linda's words. It wasn't the approval she had expected, but it was something deeper, an acknowledgement of their struggle, a recognition that what they shared wasn't something to be ashamed of. That night, as Zinna sat alone in her room, her mind was swirling with everything she had learned and felt over the past few weeks. She had never been one to stand up for herself, to believe that she deserved love or happiness. But Xavier had shown her a different way, one where love was worth fighting for, no matter what the world thought. She knew that their love would never be easy. It would never be perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The sound of a soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Xavier standing there, his eyes full of warmth and certainty. "You're not alone in this, Zinna," he said softly, stepping into the room. "We're in this together. Always." Tears filled her eyes as she walked into his arms, allowing herself to finally let go of the fear that had plagued her for so long. Xavier was right. They were stronger than any obstacle that stood in their way. Together, they could face the world and claim the love they deserved. And for the first time, Zinna allowed herself to believe that they could make it. Against all odds, they could make it. Please subscribe, like the video, and drop your comment.